April 16th, 1964. Turn on a television anywhere in America that night, and it doesn't matter which channel you land on, ABC, CBS, or NBC. All three are airing the exact same thing, at the exact same moment. No company had ever bought advertising like that before. This wasn't a movie premiere, it wasn't a moon landing, it was a commercial for a car that didn't officially exist yet. And 2 years earlier, in a cheap motel 2 miles from their own headquarters, a small group of Ford employees had been meeting almost every Saturday in secret because most of the people they worked for didn't believe in what they were building. Because 5 years before that broadcast, Ford had built a car meant to change everything. A brand new line that was supposed to outthink General Motors. Instead, it became one of the most expensive failures in American business history. So expensive that the name of that car is still used today, generations later, as a punchline for disaster. That car was the Edsel. And here's the part people get wrong about this story. The Mustang didn't save Ford from bankruptcy. Ford wasn't broke. What Ford was losing was something harder to measure, and in the long run, far more dangerous: its nerve and its relevance. An entire generation of young Americans, the biggest generation the country had ever produced, was about to start buying cars for the first time. And Ford's lineup, solid, sensible, and about as exciting as a filing cabinet, had nothing built for a single one of them. This is the story of how Ford answered that threat, not with a slogan, but with a single car almost nobody on Ford's own board wanted to approve. A car that had to be cheap enough for a school teacher and exciting enough to make a teenager pull over just to stare at it. This isn't really a story about a machine. It's a story about a handful of people nobody had heard of yet, making a bet that changed what an entire corporation was allowed to become. And to understand how big a gamble that really was, you have to go back to the disaster that made it necessary in the first place. In September of 1957, Ford launched a brand new car line named after Henry Ford's own son, the Edsel. It was supposed to be Ford's ultimate answer to General Motors, backed by the biggest market research campaign the auto industry had ever attempted. 2 years later, it was dead. Ford discontinued it in November of 1959, after losing more than $250 million. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The failure taught Ford's leadership to be terrified of being wrong in public, ever again. And that fear landed on top of another one. Just months before the Edsel launched, a catastrophic crash at Le Mans killed dozens of spectators, and the American auto industry panicked. Ford, GM, and Chrysler quietly agreed to pull out of racing and stop advertising speed altogether. Ford leaned into safety instead: padded dashboards, seat belts, an entire marketing campaign built around a single word: safe. It flopped. By the company's own later reckoning, it was a total loser of a campaign. And while Ford played it safe, the country kept moving without it. Between 1959 and 1963, the number of two-car families in America exploded from 1 million to 13 million. A massive wave of new, young drivers was about to hit the road, and Ford had nothing for them. Somebody at Ford noticed, and he was about to make the boldest bet of his career. His name was Lee Iacocca. In November of 1960, at just 36 years old, remarkably young for the job, he was named vice president and general manager of the Ford division. And almost immediately, he started pulling a small group of allies into a cheap roadside motel called the Fairlane Inn, 2 miles from Ford's own headquarters. Not the fancy hotel where Ford's executives usually met. A motel, on purpose, because what Iacocca wanted to build needed to happen far away from the people who'd say no. They called themselves the Fairlane Committee, and on weekends, in secret, they built a wish list for a car that didn't exist yet. It had to weigh no more than 2,500 pounds, cost no more than $2,500, $1 a pound, they joked, and somehow still seat 4 people and look like nothing else on the road. There was just one problem. Building something like that completely from scratch would cost Ford roughly $400 million. After the Edsel, that number was dead on arrival. So one of Iacocca's product planners, Hal Sperlich, proposed something almost sneaky in its simplicity. Don't build a new car. Disguise an old one. Take the cheap, boring, already paid-for Ford Falcon underneath it all and wrap it in a body nobody would recognize. It was either the smartest shortcut in Detroit or the same kind of corner cutting that had just killed the Edsel. Nobody was fully sure which, not even Henry Ford II. When his own designers first showed him early sketches of a small, sporty car, the man running the company, a genuine car enthusiast, barely reacted. He was cold to the whole idea, and by every normal rule of corporate politics, that reaction alone should have killed the project on the spot. But Ayakaka didn't let it die. Ford ran an internal contest. 3 separate design studios, each given just a few weeks to sketch a car that hadn't officially been approved. One night, a designer named Gail Halderman, who was already working late on a completely different Ford project, got word from his boss. Bring some sketches to a meeting at 8 o'clock the next morning. So Halderman went home, sat down at his own kitchen table, and drew 5 ideas before bed. One of them, a simple side profile, long hood, short tail, ended up pinned to a wall next to 20 other submissions. It won. Executives nicknamed the design Cougar, and for a while, the clay model even wore a small cat emblem on its nose. Henry Ford II looked at the finished proposal and finally gave his approval, but not without conditions. He capped the budget at $45 million, $10 million less than Ayakaka had asked for. He wanted an extra inch of legroom in the back seat. And he made one thing very clear. Whatever this car turned out to be, it had to sell. Ayakaka knew exactly what that meant. If it flopped, this would be the second Edsel, and the second time it happened on his watch. Ford now had about 18 months to design, engineer, tool, and build an entirely new car. And somewhere in that scramble, nobody could agree on what to actually call it. One designer said he'd always loved the P-51 Mustang, a legendary World War II fighter plane, and pushed the name onto an earlier concept car just to get people used to hearing it. A Ford market researcher who bred quarter horses as a hobby said his wife had given him a book called The Mustangs, and the name stuck from there. An outside ad agency handed Ayakaka a list of animal names to pick from, and Mustang happened to be on it. To this day, nobody fully agrees on which story is actually true. What we do know is this: Ford almost called it something else entirely. Torino, Cougar, Allegro. None of it would matter unless the car actually worked. On April 17, 1964, Ford was about to find out in front of the entire country, all at once. That night, the night before launch, Ford aired the exact same 30-minute commercial on ABC, CBS, and NBC, all at the same time. It reached more than half of every television in America in one shot. Nobody had bought advertising like that before. The next morning, April 17, 1964, Henry Ford II, the same executive who'd been cold to the whole idea 2 years earlier, personally unveiled the car at Ford's own pavilion inside the World's Fair. The same day, it hit dealerships nationwide. And America didn't just show up, it stampeded. On day 1 alone, Ford wrote up roughly 22,000 orders. In Texas, one buyer reportedly refused to leave without his car. He slept inside the dealership's showroom until his check cleared. That same week, Ayakaka appeared on the cover of Time magazine next to a red Mustang. 3 days later, Newsweek ran an almost identical cover. Same red car, same executive, like they couldn't resist copying the idea. No retail product had ever appeared on both covers before, let alone in the same week. Ayakaka himself later said those 2 covers alone were worth another 100,000 sales. Ford had hoped to sell 100,000 Mustangs in the entire first year. They didn't just hit that number, they blew past 400,000. And by the time the extended first model year wrapped, sales topped 418,000, a record for any car in a single production year up to that point. But here's what almost nobody remembers. The Mustang wasn't even first. 16 days earlier, Chrysler had quietly released the Plymouth Barracuda, built on the exact same cheap platform trick Ford was using. Technically, it was the first car of its kind ever sold in America, and it barely made a dent. Buyers chose the Mustang over it by 5, sometimes 8 to 1. Being first never mattered as much as being unforgettable, and Ford had made something unforgettable. But sales alone didn't fix everything. As the initial frenzy settled, a new problem showed up. Some enthusiasts started calling the Mustang a secretary's car, good-looking, but not a real performer underneath. Iacocca wanted that gone by beating Chevrolet's Corvette at its own game. So he called an old friend, Carroll Shelby, a Texan who'd already won Le Mans as a driver. Shelby's first reaction wasn't encouraging. "You can't make a racehorse out of a mule," he reportedly said. He built one anyway. The 1965 Shelby GT350 didn't just silence the critics. It beat the Corvette for the SCCA's Production Racing Championship 3 years running. And barely 5 months after launch, the Mustang was already showing up on movie screens. A white convertible, chased through the Swiss Alps by James Bond himself, in Goldfinger. Less than 2 years after that first Saturday morning, in a roadside motel, on March 2, 1966, the 1 millionth Mustang rolled off Ford's assembly line in Dearborn. And when Ford added up what those 2 years of Mustang sales actually meant for its bottom line, the number was almost impossible to believe. Over $1.1 billion in profit, from a car that was supposed to be a modest, affordable experiment, from a project half the boardroom didn't want to approve, from 5 sketches on a kitchen table. That's the real answer to how one car saved Ford. Not because Ford was going broke, it wasn't, but because Ford was about to become something far more dangerous for a car company. Irrelevant, boring. The brand your father drove, not the one you dreamed about. The Mustang didn't just rescue a balance sheet. It rescued Ford's place in the imagination of an entire generation, at the exact moment that generation became old enough to start buying cars and before Ford ran out of time to matter to them at all. If you made it this far, you already know this car means something. Drop a comment and subscribe, because next week we go after another legend.